So, the whole Russia situation, but more specifically, Putin and him being portrayed as this huge villain and this massive risk to Europe and the rest of the world, the biggest at least since the 40s. And it's how much of that is true and viable, and how much of it is propaganda for other reasons, is the question. So, before anything, when I say Russia, I do mean the current government slash potential oligarchy. I don't mean the country as a whole. The people are not their government. Some amazing people in Russia. Always has been. It's produced some brilliant scientists and mathematicians and musicians, everything. It's full of amazing history, amazing architecture, and really, who sacrificed more in World War II and things like that. So when I say Russia, absolutely nothing against Russia as a whole. Amazing place. And also some not so good parts. So I'm not saying they're the good guys. I'm not saying they're the devil. And Russia have done, and again, when I say Russia, I mean the government, have done some not so good little things lately. And for a long time as well. For instance, killing ex-intelligence officers on UK soil. Not ideal. Not very nice thing to do. But to think that Russia are the only ones that do such things when certain intelligence officers leave and are double agents or defect to the other side and get to a country with no extradition and they're a bit hard to get hold of, let's say, to think that Russia are the only country on the planet that does such a thing is, a little bit naive. But that's one of the things they do that isn't good for us. Cyber attacks, also not appreciated. Potential sabotage with things, not very good. Little shows of force, whereas they're not that much hassle. Still keep each other on their toes. It's not ideal. And when I'm talking about this, I think we're all really talking specifically about Putin and how he's going to be built up, I think, in the near future, but mainly because of the Ukraine situation. And again, mainly because of 2022 onwards, because a lot of people forget the 2014 situation, but mainly focusing on the whole Ukraine situation. And some people say Putin is 100% NATO provoked and West provoked into the invasion. And then some people say absolutely not. It has nothing to do with it. He was going to do it anyway. I think it's complicated. Like everything else, the whole NATO thing became an issue a long time ago. You can go a long time. It depends how far back you want to go. But even in relatively modern history, in the 80s, late 80s, when Russia were told, or the USSR were told, right, if you let Eastern Germany unite again with Western Germany, we won't push any further east. We won't try and encapsulate the whole of Europe into NATO, things like that. And then it didn't exactly go to plan because you've got to give them some sort of security, something to fall back on, some kind of buffer zone. And then that has just deteriorated over the years. Putin himself asked to join NATO more than once. He asked in very early 2000s, maybe late 90s, but early 2000s, asked Clinton when he was in office, asked Bush when he was in office, and they essentially said, no, you won't be joining NATO, and NATO rejected them. It's questionable whether they would have abided by the laws and the rules of NATO, which, whose tune do you want to march to? Really, it's not necessarily all it's cracked up to be, but either way, if the whole part of NATO was, amongst other things, not wanting communism and the USSR to spread when they get their head up, then when Russia specifically comes to you later and says, I want to be part of NATO, why turn him away? Why turn him down? Just so you can have this constant enemy to justify things, because a lot of countries are like that. A lot of countries want an enemy because it can justify a lot of things, which we'll kind of maybe get to later. But either way, they turned him away. And then a lot of NATO activity happened in Ukraine, which would definitely have you thinking if you're the border country with them. Because no matter where you're from, if you're from, say, England, would we let Russia put missiles on the border with Scotland or Wales pointed at us? No. If you're from America, would you let Russia put missiles on the border with Canada or Mexico pointed at you? No. And we know this because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And countries just don't like that. It doesn't give you a good feeling. It doesn't give you a feeling of security. And a lot of things were going on within Ukraine when Russia were given guarantees at a certain point, whether they were written down or not, that Ukraine were not going to be in NATO. But then in the 2000s, in 2008 especially, Bush started dropping so many hints about, well, Georgia and Ukraine, but about Ukraine joining NATO. What do you think that is going to do to Russia? Do you think that's not going to provoke him at all? Do you think that's not going to get ideas in their head? And then NATO start doing NATO exercises within Ukraine and then wanting to put missiles on the border. So to say it's 0% contribution to the invasion, I think is probably wrong. Whether it's the full reason or not is a different kind of question. But who loses out most in all of this is, as usual, the people. And by people, I mean the citizens of the country that have done nothing wrong, that don't want these wars. Because when Bush is hinting, oh, well, we'll maybe let Ukraine join NATO, and then there's lots of posturing in the next, 10, 15 years after that, that they will let them join NATO. Do you know what didn't happen in that time? They didn't let Ukraine join NATO. So who gets harmed out of that? Well, Ukraine, because they have the outward appearance to Russia that they're going to join NATO, whereas NATO are never going to let them join because there's a lot of corruption and a lot of dodgy dealings. So it backfires, and Ukraine are left holding this situation when they were given security guarantees to give up nuclear weapons and things like that. We're giving them backing, we're giving them money and weapons, but is it enough? Because there's a lot of people dying now. And the people that say it's 0% contribution, 0% provocation, well, Putin openly said, so everyone could hear, to NATO, stop doing this on my border, please. Stop doing this in Ukraine. And I mean, you could say each country should be allowed to do what they want, which is true. Ukraine should be allowed to do what they want. But, like I said before, if you have weapons on your border and you have a country going to join a massive organisation that's against you, you can see where it comes from. And the people that say zero provocation, it's a bit tricky to say that, because at the end of the day, you didn't call his bluff. You kept doing the thing and you kept letting it happen. So if you didn't call his bluff, how can you know he wouldn't have stopped? You never can, because you kept doing it. And then when it got to a certain point, all the Americans were pulled out of the embassies in Ukraine, which you could say, well, that's sensible. You're trying to protect your people. But the other side to look at is that's kind of giving the green light to Russia to go ahead then, because they're going to risk a lot more knowing there's supposedly no Americans on the ground anymore. So you're giving them a green light to go. And Ukraine is very complicated. There's a lot of corruption. People don't like to hear that. People like to think that they're the whole victim in this. And I mean, they might be the victim in a certain situation, but it's not a perfect country, although none are. And we have a lot of corruption here. America have a lot of corruption. A lot of places do. But they had Yanukovych in charge. And then in 2014, there was a little revolution and he got voted out, and then there was an uprising and he had to flee to not get murdered in the streets, potentially. And was that revolution 100% organic? Or was there Western influence and potentially people on the ground influencing it? Because Yanukovych was very pro-Russian. And a lot of the West didn't like that, and they wanted more control. And then after he's gone, a couple of leaders later, they've got a certain more puppet-like leader who might be really good at acting the part. Just saying. And then it all comes down to, as wrong as this sounds, there is the whole thing of why are we back in the Ukraine? And I think the normal answer would be, well, because they got invaded and they did nothing to get invaded. Well, if you ignore the whole NATO situation and provocation, then kind of true. But if that is our reason for backing them and keeping the war going, which is costing a lot of lives, then a little bit further east, there is another kind of invasion going on and some kind of very genocidal actions going on by another country. So why aren't we going against them and backing the people that they are literally genociding off the planet, or attempting to, and openly so at this point? So I'm just saying, you can be too isolationist, which we'll get to in a minute, but it doesn't look good when this is a land grab, potentially at worst, and somebody else is doing what I've said. But in terms of numbers, some recent numbers in terms of the Russia-Ukraine situation, reckon about 1.5 million people dead. And that's a lot of people dead on both sides. And that's changing, especially of Ukraine, that's changing the demographic of the country. All their young people, all their young males, their breeding age males, pardon the expression, but a lot of them have been killed now. And they're conscripting, possibly forcefully, people in their 40s and 50s and things like that because they have to. So I'm not saying we should pull out all support and everyone should pull out all support for Ukraine. But as usual, in this situation, the people that are losing out are literally the people of the country on both sides, Russia and Ukraine. They're both losing out because of this. They're both losing a lot of people because of this. 1.5 million, if that's the right number, is too many. And for what purpose? To do a proxy war to weaken Russia so we don't have to get our own hands dirty and lose our own people? I'd rather we don't lose a single person. I don't think we should put boots on the ground in combat roles officially, but neither should they. Like, you should defend your country 100%. Every country should defend itself if it was invaded. You might be called an insurgent for doing so, but you should defend your country. And if you're a well-armed country, which sadly some aren't, it'll be a lot easier because you're not dependent on the army that is run by the government. But that's to one side. The thing that worries a lot of people is history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And given a country carte blanche to annex another country and think that that will appease them and that'll be the end of it, doesn't always work out. There is circumstances, things like that do work. Countries get divvied up, things like that, and it has worked in the past. But obviously, in 1938 onwards, that goes a bit sketchy. And a certain mustachioed painter annexed Austria with an army he wasn't meant to have, and it was let go to appease him and be like, oh, well, it was kind of there. Like, it's kind of the same country. Let them have it. It won't do any more. And then he wanted a little bit of Czechoslovakia. And then he wanted it all. And then he wanted Poland. And then everyone's like, right, that's enough. We're drawing the line. This is the line. By which point, the army is massive and shouldn't have been in existence, really. But it was. And a repeat of World War II is really what echoes in people's minds still to this day, and why people still compare Putin to Hitler and do say, well, the same might happen if we let him take Ukraine. And I'm not arguing that it's zero chance, but what I'm saying is the people are losing out. If 1.5 million people have died on both sides, that's too much. But what will happen if he gets Ukraine? Does he just want Ukraine as a buffer zone? Will he demilitarize it, leave it as a buffer zone, leave it running itself, possibly put a puppet in, as if that doesn't happen regularly these days and from the dawn of time? Or does he want it for its resources, its minerals, its massive farming, its energy? Does he want it for all of that? Does he want it and then he's more resource rich than he needs to be, and then he'll expand and push further? Because the whole idea with the NATO provocation kind of works both ways. Where he wanted less countries in it, it kind of backfires, and then other neighbouring countries that don't want to get invaded then get allowed into NATO, and now they're semi-safe. The problem is Ukraine aren't. So did he want to do it before they got into NATO? Was that the point? Because he knows he can't strike them once they are. But either way, it's a very complicated situation. And is it just sheer provocation and looking after the country to not have an enemy bordering you? Or is it a land grab? And is he trying to make Russia even bigger and take on more and more, like happened in World War II? And that's what worries people. So it's tricky, and it's impossible to really know and to know what the outcomes would have been. But I think NATO and the West definitely didn't help, because if you back a dog into a corner and keep poking it and you get bit, you can't then be the victim as well. And if they had backed out of Ukraine and said, fair enough, we understand, you're not allowed in NATO because there's too much issues right now, it would have had a lot bigger problem finding an excuse to properly invade then. But it's just, where will it lead? Because I think now we're going to start seeing a build-up, and it's what is the reason for this build-up is the question. Is it just because now the military spending has got increased, which it should have always been? It shouldn't have been knocked down when Labour got in. That was stupid, because you should always have a strong army. You don't need to use it. This is the point. You should have it and not need it, and have it for security. So if anything does happen, you've got it. And I think people understand that, and you don't need an excuse to go and use it. But who wins in this situation? We already know who lost and who's losing. It's the people. It's the people dying on the battlefield and with these strikes that are just civilians and just army. You know, they're dying because of this. The higher ups aren't. Not the government level aren't. The puppets aren't. But who is winning? And I think the only people that are winning really are the military industrial complex, and the ones that make weapons. That's their job. Their job is to make weapons of war, and they're doing quite well, because everything we supply that we've paid for and we supply to Ukraine, and that America have paid for and supplied to Ukraine, and so on and so on and so on, they've all come from weapons manufacturers, and they're all making their money. They're making money off these deaths, these 1.5 million deaths and countless casualties. They don't care, because that's their job. And they're getting funded. And then a certain percentage of that, potentially, just speculating, hypothetically, is getting passed down to certain people in governments that are keeping this going. Because if the government's just outright said, no, as bad as it is, we're going to pull out, as bad as it is, if Russia take Ukraine fully, we're not funding you, it's going to be over, but people are going to stop dying. Russia aren't going to go through Ukraine and kill everyone. No, not a chance. Why would they? No matter what, he considers Ukraine part of Russia, and them, a lot of them as Russian people. He would not do that. He wouldn't genocide them like certain other people. So if that happened, and I'm not saying it should, but if all funding stopped and all weapons stopped, the death would go down, and these people wouldn't be getting killed on a daily basis. But the weapons manufacturers won't be making their money. The people running these countries that are doing the funding and doing the little wink wink, let's have a war, they won't be making money. So you've got to ask yourself, why are they getting built up as the enemy more and more? Because I say it's very early July, and I can just see this going on now. I think he's going to get built up more and more and more, almost as if we don't have a choice. But I think the problem with that is that wouldn't be a war of necessity. Not at the point we're at now anyway. And to send British troops would be a betrayal. And if there's a combat troop on the ground and one loses their life, whoever sent them, whatever Prime Minister's in at that point, has betrayed the country. As bad as that, like, I don't care how that sounds, because he has. because that's not a just war, and you've been building it up for a reason, and you've been spinning propaganda for a reason. I'm not saying Putin's an angel. I'm not saying he's not a dictator in the worst sense of the word or corrupt oligarchy, but what is the reason for it is what you have to ask, and there is a reason for it. And the constant news that will get worse and worse probably as time goes on, building them into the big enemy, hopefully doesn't end in that, and hopefully stops just an excuse to keep funding the war machine, which is just churning up human bodies and spitting out profit. And hopefully there is a resolution soon enough, because whatever the reason for any of it, I've said it I don't know how many times, the people are the ones losing out. The people of them countries that are really good people, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them people, really good people that don't want this and don't deserve it. And whatever the resolution would be, which won't be ideal, whether its part is annexed, like Crimea was, and we go back to 2014 lines, or whatever the outcome is, I think overall the massive amount of killing needs to stop, and this whole propaganda build-up needs to stop unless it's justified, and because it's just going to escalate until everybody is at fever pitch and thinks it's a just war, like happened with other countries, Iraq, and it's just an excuse to make money and kill people that don't deserve it. Some wars are just wars. Some people deserve it. This isn't one of them situations, really. And hopefully it doesn't escalate into a false flag, because false flags existed since Romans and Greeks and probably long before. Just, oh, they've attacked us. Look, they've attacked us. Now we have to attack back. And it didn't really happen, or it was a fake attack. And don't get me wrong, Russia aren't above such things. Certain bombings happened when people were in charge or coming up into power that were potentially not exactly truthful and were false flags. All countries are capable of it, but hopefully we don't stoop to that level in 2026 or maybe 2027 and initiate a war that we don't want to be in, because whoever declares that, potentially it's a massive betrayal. So what are the reasons? What are the reasons for the invasion, really? What are the reasons for it keeping going and being funded by the West, who aren't risking any of our people, which I agree with, but you're still letting a lot of people die? And what are the reasons for Putin being built up into this massive villain who is the worst since Hitler? And how much of it is viable and legitimate? And how much of it is a lot of lies for people behind the scenes to make money?